Perfect first date. Discover strategies to make your first date a memorable one. Chapter 1. Prepare for your first date. The following are some thoughts on the matter of preparing for the first date that should be considered with some seriousness to ensure the encounter goes as planned. The basics. Start by looking good and feeling good way before the date actually takes place. If there is a heightened level of excitement, the feel good aura will be evident, but when it comes to the looking good element, some changes may have to be made. These may include simple things that don't really incur costs, or if it does, these costs would be minimal and certainly worth the investment. Doing some exercises, eating well and sleeping well will all help to prepare the individual both mentally and physically. Be prepared way in advance, and these would include all the little things that may seem insignificant but could potentially put a damper on the actual should they surface. These may include elements such as the intended attire to be worn, the venue for the date, especially if it is unfamiliar to the individual, and the contingency plans if the venue becomes unsuitable for any given reason, the topics to be discussed to keep the date pleasant and flowing smoothly, any additional needs that might have to be taken care of such as pets and other dependents, and almost anything that can cause interruptions. However, in exploring all these possibilities, caution should be exercised to ensure the individual does not get unnecessarily anxious and go into panic mode. Chapter 2. Things to do. Synopsis. In the first date scenario, the individual has to do virtually everything right, if there are intentions to secure a second date with the other party. This is very important as first impressions are often the deciding factor that will dictate the tone of the encounter and the second date possibility. The following are some points to consider for things to do on the first date. What to do. The most basic yet often awkward element within the date layout is the payment for the entire experience. Making the other party split the bill is an accepted practice, but not one that is appreciated, especially if the individual intends to portray a successful and capable position. Therefore, taking the trouble to gently and without any inflated ego issues, it should be established that the bill will covered, and the other party's contributions would be to simply have a good time. Picking the correct location would also be something to be considered, as the ideal setting would be required based on the general direction the date is designed to take. Finding a location that is suitable and convenient for both parties will set the tone for the entire date. Unless money is not an issue, picking a venue that would not cause the individual to be mindful of the bill at the end of the date would be advised, as this can put a real damper on the encounter. Respecting the other party enough to ensure being on time is not an issue would also be something else to consider. If the other party is kept waiting, can be potentially very embarrassing and stressful. Therefore, planning the route, time, transportation, and other connective elements should be done way before the actual day of the date. This will be a good way to show respect to the other party and display the personal standards of the individual. Chapter 3. What to wear. Synopsis. Impressions made on a first date are very telling of both parties and the possible outcome of the date. Therefore, it would be in the best interest of both parties to come well prepared both mentally and physically. Presenting their A game would show that effort is being put into this encounter. The following are some tips on what would be considered suitable attire for the first date. Have a look. Perhaps the first thing to consider would be the issue of being comfortable. Mentally, the date is already going to preoccupy the mind before and during the actual date, therefore having to be distracted with the attire for the date would not help put the individual at ease. Wearing something comfortable yet complimenting should be the base of the idea behind the ensemble put together. Other considerations would include the weather and venue for the date. These also factor strongly in the choice of attire. There is nothing worse than being either overdressed or underdressed. Finding out a little about the plans for the date would also help in deciding what to wear, and this should be made clear to both parties if possible, so that unwanted awkwardness will not be encountered with the wrong choice of attire. If the date is not going to follow the conventional meal and drinks, then the attire chosen for the date will have to be carefully considered. This is especially so if outdoor activities are planned as part of the date. Suitable footwear is something that is often overlooked and yet can cause the most problems. Therefore, attention to this is equally important as the other parts of the ensemble. Deciding between sexy and sedate can also be quite a challenge. The individual would have to decide this based on the desired intentions for the date. The intentions and end goals will dictate the choice between sexy and sedately comfortable attire. Chapter 4. Where to go. Synopsis. This can be a fun activity or a stressful one, as choosing a suitable venue is something that needs careful consideration from many different angles. Giving it some careful consideration and planning will contribute positively to the overall enjoyable experience. The following are some ideas on what to do and where to go for the first date endeavor. Where. The actual venue would very much depend on the personalities of both parties going on the date. If both parties are fun-loving and the adventurous types, then something outdoors would be welcomed and even considered more comfortable and enjoyable. Incorporating come-light activities may also have some level of appeal to both parties, but this would have to be agreed upon before the actual date, as there are often other connecting factors that would need to be considered. Picking somewhere neutral such as a cafe or coffee bar would be advised, as this would be casual and pleasant setting that would give both parties a chance to relax and get to know each other. It would also not have the presence of alcohol that might cause indulgence, if there were nervous to be calmed. Keeping the time frame for the first date short would also be advisable, as a longer period may cause the element of tiredness and boredom to set in. Ideally, the time frame should be dictated to by the general flow of the date, and if it happens to run longer than anticipated, there should not be any cause for concern if both parties are having a good time. Finding interesting venues that are appealing to both parties is important. Another fact to consider would be the distance and 13. Convenience of these venues. This is especially important as both parties have arranged to meet at the venue. Some ideal and popular venues may include museums, bowling arenas, golfing, the zoo, planetarium, and many more. 14. Chapter 5. Conversations. Synopsis. First dates are usually quite stressful, as both parties are intent on making a good impression on the other. If there is the added pressure of not know what to talk about, then the date is probably headed for disaster. Therefore, it is very important to be armed with some good conversational topic and ready content to get the date off on the right foot. The following are some of the conversational starters that should be considered if the individual wants the date to have some chance of success. Talking. Knowing about what is going on both within the community both parties live in and around the country in general. This is often a great conversation opener, especially if both parties are intellectually inclined. Other topic may be centered on the political and governmental issues and how it affects the commons, such as the people on the date. Other conversational starts may stem from the very attire being worn or the accessories. Pick something complimenting to say about the particular article can start the conversation going, as more details are divulged and tips are exchanged. Also, it's a good way to gauge the taste and preferences of the other party. Paying close attention to what the other party is saying and contributing to the overall content of the conversation will help alert the mind to possible interesting questions to ask on the topic, and also help to introduce other topics that would be connected somehow to what is being discussed. This will be a pleasant change for the other party to note that whatever he or she is saying is being noted and taken seriously. The most important thing to remember is to try to relax and be confident and natural. All these traits are deemed admirable and thus certainly get the attention of the other party. Chapter 6. First impression. Synopsis. Sad but true is the thought process that first impressions usually set the tone for anything and everything. Therefore, it is very important to take the trouble to make the best first impression possible to ensure the desired results of impressing the other party are achieved. The following are just some of the recommendations that should be considered when making the first impression is on the agenda for the first date. Great info. The attire for the night should be at least smart casual. Dressing comfortably yet neatly and attractively is very important, as what meets the eye is going to be what is judged. Being careful to not dress too sexily would also be advised, as the individual would not want to give out the wrong signals or cause any unwanted advances to take place. Therefore, choosing the attire that makes the individual comfortable and attractive is the best way to go. The way the individual presents himself or herself is also important. Posture and choice of sitting positions and the general body language used are all signs that will let the other party be clued into the character and demeanor of the individual. The presence of confidence, of lack of it, can be clearly deduced for the posture and the way the individual handles things. Confidence and alertness are both attributes that should ideally be displayed on the date. Learning how to throw out a compliment or two without sounding insincere is a very important style to learn and adopt. Being able to compliment something about the other person will call attention to it in a positive way, and this will ensure the other party stays flattered and happy because his or her efforts have been noted. People often respond well to compliments, and this can set the positive tone for the date. Chapter 7. After your first date. Synopsis. In most cases, the action taken after the first date will have some bearing on the eventual direction the relationship will take. Although it is still commonly perceived to be the man's prerogative to make the first move after the initial date, most women today find it bothersome to wait, especially if they had a good time, and so make the move instead. Following the hesitation, if any, is mainly due to the fact that neither party wants to be rejected, thus the hesitancy to initiate contact immediately. There are also a lot of doubts for both parties if the period between the next contact is prolonged. However, most experts would advise a comfortable waiting period, as this will give both parties the time to digest the events of the first date and the general characteristics of each other. Rushing into a second date will not allow either party the excitement and suspense that would ideally heighten the prospect of a second encounter. However, to be noted here is that waiting too long to make contact is also equally unnerving for both parties, and this only increases further with more time lapsed. Most females enjoy discussing the first date with their friends and try to analyze every detail of the date. Advice is given on perceptions made, and then the female will decide if it would be worth the effort to agree to a second date should the opportunity present itself. For the male, however, the scenario is really quite different, as most males will more likely be occupied with getting on with their lives and work, thus having little time to dissect the date and analyze every detail of it, and should he decide to make the next move, making contact will then be the point of contention for him. This next contact will be the only element that occupies his thoughts and actions until contact is finally made and the next date is agreed upon. Wrapping up, there is a lot of apprehension before an actual first date takes place, and most of these feelings are brought on by wrong choices made following up to the date, or perceived awkwardness and mistakes that might occur during the date. All this can be avoided with a little careful research and knowledge on things other may or may not have done that attributed to a disastrous first date. The following are some points to consider in order to avoid having to go through a first date horror. Spending too much time on the phone or online with the intended date partner before the actual date could be potentially disastrous for the date. This is because both parties may eventually end up being all talked out and have nothing much to say at the date itself. This could also mean that there would be no more new things to explore with the other party that would make it finding out things about each other. Building up the date in one's mind into an overinflated and unrealistic platform may take the excitement out of the date and replace it with stress and anxiety. When there are too many expectations to live up to, there is very little room to actually let loose and have pure unbridled fun. Allowing the actual date scenario to dictate the course of the events can present its own sort of excitement and surprise, which if met with openness can unfold a good time. Location is a very important factor to consider when it comes to Planning the first date. Being comfortable and being able to reach the location with ease is a good way to start the date, especially if both parties have agreed to meet there, as opposed to being picked up by one party.